start with the one you've seen more than any of these. It's McNeese State. Gonzaga does have them on Thursday in Salt Lake City in the first round of the NCAA tournament. I mean, this McNeese team, 30-3, 17-1 in the Southland, really impressive looking at just kind of like the surface level numbers of what they have. Tell me a little bit about this squad. What are some of the keys for those who are going to be watching this game, for the Gonzaga fans who are a little concerned and seeing a bunch of the prognosticators picking McNeese over them? What does this team bring?
Yeah, well, let me say this first and acknowledge this first, because I've been looking all over social media. The first thing Gonzaga fans have been pointing out is the 30-3 record with 4 games against non-Division I opponents, including, if you look at their schedule, they did play the Mississippi University for women. So I'm just throwing that out there. That's been kind of a laughing point. Now, with that said, with the 4 non-D1s they've played, they've also beaten UAB by 20. They've beaten VCU. They've beaten Louisiana, albeit not a great team in the Sun Belt, but had a solid year. They went to a Michigan team that had a lot of struggles this year and just moved on from Juwan Howard, but controlled that game really start to finish in Ann Arbor. And then in a Southland Conference that is not the worst conference in America. It's certainly not the best. It's obviously, you look at the metrics, and it's toward the bottom as far as conferences go, but they did what they had to do for the most part. They lost one conference game at Southeastern Louisiana by 3. They are number 1 nationally in scoring margin. So I think a lot of times when you look at a mid-major, the question is, okay, well, how are they? Are they escaping teams? Are they winning by 1? They haven't played that many close games. In fact, you can count them pretty much on a hand. They've basically played, I think it's 10 games in total, decided by single digits all season long. Their last game they played against a team that was decided by less than 10 was against Lamar a few weeks ago, and they won that game in Beaumont. I mean, they've won 11 straight games. They've won 25 of 26. And Will Wade is a name that Gonzaga fans, I'm sure, know from his time at VCU and LSU and now McNeese. And we know what happened at LSU and kind of the way that things went down there. He was suspended 10 games at the start of the year. It was initially going to be a 5-game suspension. It turns to 10. McNeese tacked onto it. And with him as the head coach officially on the sidelines, they're 22-1, with the only loss being at Southeastern. So I think the number one thing when you look at this team, in today's day and age, Zach, with the transfer portal and the way that guys shift around, the number one thing a Gonzaga fan would see if you start digging into their roster is power 6 transfer, 2-time transfer. I mean, there's a lot of guys. It starts with Shahade Wells. He is from TCU. I think Gonzaga fans know him very well because they eliminated him in last year's NCAA tournament. So that's your first storyline right off the bat. You got the Southland Conference Player of the Year, a guy who has done it in his career. He was at UT Arlington prior to going to TCU, and he was an all-Sun Belt player there. He started at Tyler Junior College, but he is as good a guard as you're going to see in March, in my opinion. I mean, the way he works off ball screens, he's a terrific three-point shooter, gets to the free throw line a ton. I mean, he just completely dominated the Southland tournament. He had 27 points in both games. I called those on radio. He was really, really good, the way he can control a game. And then I think the number one thing is the way that he defends. He's their leader. He's their best player, and he's top 5 nationally in steals. He's been there all season long. So, that's a guy who's been around the block. You got a guy like Antavion Collum, who transferred in from Cal State Bakersfield. There's a bunch of multi-time transfers on this team. He started his career at Ole Miss. He's a stretch 4, a good three-point shooter. So he's got a lot of ways to beat you from beyond the arc. He's made some clutch shots for them. I think a guy like DJ Richards off the bench has been really good. He was at UTSA a year ago. He averaged double figures in the American. So he's come over and shot the lights out. He's one of the best three-point shooters in the country. And then Christian Shumate's a name that I think Gonzaga fans should start getting familiar with. This guy's been on SportsCenter 9 times. He's been the number 1 play on SportsCenter twice. He is not a good shooter from outside. He's not going to beat you with a jump shot. He's only like a 45% career free throw shooter, but he is as athletic as they come at 6'6". He's the guy who's actually, he's been one of the few holdovers. Will Wade, I think, had 12 newcomers, 9 transfers. He's been with McNeese for 3 years, so he's gone from an 11-win season to an 11-win season to now winning 30 games, and he's in his first NCAA tournament. I know that he's got something to prove. So those are kind of some of the names to look at. And Mike Saunders is a guy who's been at Cincinnati and Utah. He comes off the bench. CJ Felder was at Florida, and he's a guy who's, I think, giving them a lot of good minutes. This is a deep team. There's not a lot of drop-off when they go to the bench. So the number one thing is, as far as keys go, when you start looking at the roster, you can't see this as a mid-major team when they have, kind of the makeup of a Power 6 roster with the way Will Wade has put it together.
And that was one of the first things I kind of like that jumped out was just the depth and the usage of that bench, like 9 players that average 10 or more minutes a game. And you talked about like that depth because also just because I'm just thinking about this Gonzaga team that hasn't used their bench really all year long, and a
Right.
team that only really goes 6 or 7 deep based on the game. I think they only used 6 players in the game against St. Mary's just the other night. Uh, how I mean, obviously, like you mentioned, McNeese hasn't played a whole lot of close games in this one, but like it also looks like that this is a team that kind of thrives on being able to kind of get out and run and be able to kind of use some of the depth that they do have. I'd see like the third in the nation in steals per game, third in turnover margin, the 20.8 points off turnovers per game. This is a team that seems like it wants to get out and run and turn that defense and the offense a lot more. Kind of talk about like just style wise, what we might see from this squad.
Yeah, I think they're top 30 in fast break points. You mentioned the points off turnovers. They are electric in transition. And when I say that, if they can get out and run, if they can turn you over, it's going to become a highlight that may very well make it its way on the Sports Center because of the amount of athletes they have in the open floor. I mentioned Shoemate. One guy I didn't mention is Javon Garcia. He's a junior college transfer. He was at the College of the Sequoias, which is in California, so people might know that a little bit. But that's another guy who's an elite athlete. I mean, there are 3 or 4 guys who can dunk on you. If you're 6'10" or taller on this team, they can really jump. So yeah, I think they do want to get out and run. They are good in the half court. I don't know that they're the most elite team in America in the half court because they don't really have a true post presence. A guy, you can throw the ball down to. They don't have, a Graham Ike to throw the ball in the block to and get you a basket when you need it. But they have, an elite point guard play. They have really good shooting. You mentioned the depth, Zach. I think one of the things that stuck out to me when I was first looking at them this year and just kind of looking through the numbers, there are 4 or 5 guys around 40% from 3. So, a lot of times a team will shoot pretty well from 3-point range, and it's one guy making 93s or 100 threes or whatever it is. And you just look at these guys, it's 40 makes at a 38% clip, 45 makes at a 45% clip. You just go down the line. There's a lot of guys who can beat you from beyond the arc. So I think that's a lot of what Will Wade can do. And then, he's created this element of having a bench that scores, I think, 26 or 27 points a game. The bench was really, really good in the Southland tournament in those 2 games I called. There had been a top 50 bench scoring unit nationally all season long. So when you have a team that can not have a major drop-off when you have to, give Shahade Wells a breather, give Christian Shoemate a breather, give DJ Richards a breather, or DJ Richards can hop in. I mean, the luxury of having a guy like Mike Saunders, who would probably be a starting point guard on a bunch of Power 6 conference teams, bringing him off the bench. I mean, he gave them some great minutes in the Southland championship game against Nichols, which they won by 16 points. I mean, they've won over the course of this 11-game win streak, they've won all but one of them by 10 or more points. So a big reason for that is how deep they are and how many weapons they have.
And look, I mean, talked about like some of the results early on because obviously, like even though Michigan was not very good this year, kind of like still getting a win on the road at a Big Ten opponent still does have a lot of value, especially for when you're from a smaller conference or whatnot. And the one thing we know is that the Gonzaga fans are going to travel well. They don't have to go far. They're going to only have to travel to Salt Lake City. What's like it feels like that sort of experience is going to help this squad because they did have to go into some more hostile environments in some bigger arenas and heading to Salt Lake to take on the Zags, who also travel well and will pack that building. It does seem like at least that there's some level of they may have some comfort in that sort of environment.
Yeah, I'll tell you this, first of all, it's certainly going to be a little different than the Southland Conference tournament because I don't know how much you followed kind of the way that they structure that, but McNeese played the Southland tournament on their home floor. So they're going to host it through 2028 in Lake Charles. I don't know how much people know about Lake Charles and the community there, but people there love their teams. It had been historically a pretty good FCS football school that's made some great runs deep, and this is by far the best basketball season they have ever had. It's the most wins in school history. Their 3rd NCAA tournament appearance, their first in 22 years. It basically took a couple of games with Will Wade on the sidelines officially after the suspension for their gym to be filled the entire season. And they have traveled well. Obviously, in the Southland Conference, you're not playing in the biggest gyms in the world, but to your credit, they went to VCU. Will Wade was on the sidelines for that game, and they won that game, with a couple assistants coaching. So, to win in that environment, to go to UAB and and beat a tournament team there by 21 the way they did. That's a really good offense too, and they held them to 60 points. McNeese is one of the best in the country as far as scoring defense goes, and it's kind of been that way all season long. But no, I think that this crowd, the point I'm trying to make is they have gotten behind a team that has had a really, really special season. I mean, you don't see this much. I was saying this to someone earlier. McNeese is a 12 seed. They were knocking on the door for maybe an 11 seed earlier in the year. A Southland team has never been an 11 seed. This matches the best seed the conference has ever had. I think SFA was a 12 seed in 2014 and 2015. And people might remember in 2014, they knocked off VCU, which, Will Wade was not too long away. He had actually just left VCU as an assistant to go coach at Chattanooga. But a season like this doesn't come along very often in this conference. This community, it wasn't that long ago, man. They had a couple of hurricanes hit the area, Laura and Delta, like back-to-back consecutively. Their gym got destroyed. They had to rebuild the whole thing. It's a beautiful new complex they have, but this community has been waiting for something like this for a long time. They're going to be out there in full force. I don't know that they'll outnumber Gonzaga fans. Gonzaga fans they've been doing this, 25 straight years now? I think they've got, they're a little more in rhythm for how this goes west.
They have some practice at this. They have some experience.
I'd say they're a little more like that, yeah. But I will tell you this, I don't think this team will be phased. I mean, you look at the roster makeup. I was talking about how many older guys they have. They've got 6 juniors, 3 or 4th-year juniors. They have a senior, and then they have 3 grad students. They've got, I think, 4 or 5 two-time transfers. They have a couple guys who weren't even eligible until later on in the season when the two-time transfer rules went. I mentioned Mike Saunders and C.J. Felder. Both of those guys weren't eligible until, the end of non-conference play. So they're not going to be phased by this kind of environment. And, yeah, I think the early test they had, I would say that only has to help as far as experience goes.
What's maybe is there something that, even though, like, obviously this team won 30 games, it's hard to kind of like pick what they don't do well. But what's something that maybe that Gonzaga might be able to take advantage of, or what's something that kind of like sticks out to you in a matchup like this that you're kind of like, okay, maybe this is the one thing or a couple things that McNeese is going to have a bigger challenge against?
Yeah, I think a couple things. Now, to your point, you lose 3 games. It's hard to find fault with a team like this. I think what I dug into during the conference tournament was, looking at the games that have been decided by single digits. So basically 10 games that have been, decided by 9 points or fewer, and kind of what happens in those games. And the bottom line is teams that hang with them knock down threes. And we know Gonzaga can shoot the 3. I think that in the 3 losses McNeese had, teams made about 11 threes per game and did it efficiently at about a 42 or so % clip. Now, this is a pretty good 3-point defense. It has been all season long. I think I had it. Yeah, I mean, they're top 40 in the nation in 3-point defense. They've been pretty good in that regard. But, in the Southland Championship game, for instance, I remember watching Will Wade on the sidelines. Nichols had a guy, Deontay Smith, go for 33 points in that game. He just went ballistic from 3-point range. And there were a lot of breakdowns defensively by them on the 3-point arc. So that is an area that, look, Gonzaga, we know they can be streaky at times from 3-point range, but there's also, there's a capable element to that. There is not a lot of size in this McNeese team. That's, I think, the number one thing someone would look at just from a roster value standpoint. The tallest guy is 6'9". No one, as far as that size goes, it's not a team that's going to go and overwhelm you as far as block shots go. They have a pretty good block rate on KenPom. I think they block about 30% of their shots or something like that. I'm sorry, not 30% is too many. They block about 12% of their shots. 30%, that's otherworldly. But it's about a 12% block rate. So it's not the worst thing in the world, but there are opportunities if you have a post presence to attack inside in that regard. And so I would think that a guy like Graham Ike in a matchup like this, Anton Watson, and depending on what he can do in the block, could those guys be a problem for McNeese? Absolutely. I think that is where Gonzaga's strength is. I think McNeese has really good guard depth. I think they've got experienced and older guards. I like McNeese as far as matching up with the Gonzaga backcourt and as far as that goes. But those are sort of the 2 things that have stood out with them. And then, yeah, they've been pretty good all year at not turning the ball over. They can at times get careless, like any team that, can have a possession turned into a highlight in the blink of an eye. They can also throw the ball away and get careless at times. Doesn't happen that much. They have, again, guys who are pretty good as far as the assist turnover ratio goes. I mean, they're one of the best in the country as far as turnover margin. But those are a couple things I look at for sure. And then you also have the question of you're playing in an NCAA tournament for the first time if you're not named Shahade Wells. He's the only guy with NCAA tournament experience. Their coach has been to some NCAA tournaments, but I don't think you can ever, you can never count that enough as far as tournament experience goes and guys who've been there and done it. And I think Gonzaga in that regard, with the advantage they have, I mean, that has to play a role, especially early on. Will it matter over the course of 40 minutes? I don't know, but that is certainly something that, it matters. You got these older guys who've been at Power Sixes, but only one of them has played in an NCAA tournament. It's a different beast when you're going into the big dance for the first time.
Absolutely.